Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the original custodians of the land where I am presenting from today, the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging and acknowledge that this land was never ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Entering into this self-study, I stumbled about my own wonderings, considering what was most important to me as a pre-service teacher. If I had undergone this subject as a first-year student, I believe my wonderings would have been different entirely. However, as of November last year, my life and my identity took a somewhat unexpected turn. In November of 2020, at 24 years old, I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, otherwise known as ASD. This diagnosis was the last step on a journey of self-discovery that I have been undertaking for several years prior. The first time it was ever suggested I could be on the spectrum, I was around 15 years old. I'd been to many therapist appointments before that, and will have gone to many afterward. Will have sat in the offices of counsellors, psychologists, mental health triages, and psychiatrists trying to figure out why I just didn't fit quite right. This time it was a nurse's office, and I remember her asking me about my childhood, and in passing, not thinking much of it, I had told her about how I had to wear my socks back to front and inside out because of the seam. The notion that I could be autistic was ridiculous not only to me, but to my mum as well. I wasn't anything like our picture of autism. I wasn't obsessed with numbers or trains. I didn't bash my head against the walls or have no friends. Little did I know that this skewed stereotype of the autistic experience would keep me from being diagnosed for nearly another decade. Immediately after I was diagnosed, I was going into my second placement. Having this new piece of information, I doubted myself and my place in this degree. Should I even be a teacher if I was quote-unquote disabled? Did I have the skills or the insight to impact positively on my future students? I still went, unconfident and terrified. In spite of my self-deprecation and self-doubt, I came out of it with some wonderful experiences. I think my newfound understanding of myself actually helped me to better my understanding of the struggles of my students. However, after having completed all of my placements, it's clear that people's understanding of autism, and especially how it presents in girls and women, is widely misunderstood. It is clear from my investigations into the topic that how autism affects girls is a hugely under-researched field. It is also evident that the majority of academic writing surrounding the autistic experience is undertaken from a neurotypical perspective. Entering into this self-study, my research topic was, more broadly, autistic girls in the classroom. The question nagging at me being, how do we support them? And how do we educate those trying to support them? As I continued exploring my wonderings, another question arose. How do I support myself? An autistic educator entering into the classroom. What support is there in place now for not only autistic students, but autistic teachers? I will be answering these questions through literary research and by employing the personal history self-study method. As my newfound autistic identity and teaching practice become more interlinked, it is important that I look back to how I was in the classroom, and even before that, as an undiagnosed autistic girl, and see if any of the experiences I underwent could inform my teaching practice in the future. As I continued reflecting on my own personal experiences, I kept asking myself, what is the main problem? What am I looking to solve with this research, with this self-study? Ultimately, the number one issue is that girls are slipping through the cracks, and like me, aren't being diagnosed till much later in life. Research highlights how difficult the diagnostic process can be for girls in comparison to their male counterparts. It is also clear that girls are misdiagnosed with other mental health conditions. This can be detrimental to self-esteem and overall well-being. I myself was diagnosed with several disorders during my adolescence. I concluded I was just wrong. I was sad all the time, life was exhausting, and I couldn't figure out why. Another major issue is teacher and adult perception of autism in general. Although it is clear that more awareness for autism has come about during the years, there is a recognisable deficit in relation to autistic females without any co-occurring developmental delays, and the stigma about what autism is supposed to look like still clouds our judgments. I looked back over some of my secondary school reports to see what my teacher's perception of my learning ability was, and was disappointed but ultimately unsurprised by some of my findings. Teachers consistently complained about how too many absences were affecting my learning. However, I was also told to improve my eye contact when addressing the class and become a more active participant in my learning. At this point, I was school refusing due to an intense anxiety and exhaustion I couldn't quite explain. Psychologists told my parents that they should be stricter on me, and teachers consistently reinforced that I was a bad student. When I left class early for a psychologist's appointment, my Year 8 Humanities teacher addressed the class stating how poor of a report I would be receiving for that semester. During my placements, I was pleased to see attitudes surrounding a diverse classroom had improved somewhat since my time at school. However, stigmas and stereotypes surrounding individuals on the spectrum still seem to be somewhat prevalent. A teacher during one of my placements remarked how an autistic student in the class was off with the fairies and couldn't be seated with peers due to fear of distraction. My last placement, I was at an all-girls school. It was generally acknowledged by the staff that anxiety was high among the students. It was clear, although undiagnosed, that several girls presented with autistic traits that I had as a teenager. The one officially diagnosed student I encountered was basically left to her own devices, as it was considered too difficult to get her to work effectively with everyone else. Research has also highlighted that a major negative aspect of the high school experience for girls on the spectrum is teachers' lack of knowledge surrounding ASD symptomology in females. During my studies, disability practices are covered very briefly. And even more brief is strategy recognising and supporting autistic students, and the differences between girls and boys on the spectrum isn't explored at all. So it is unsurprising that parents with girls on the spectrum are dissatisfied with teacher knowledge in this area, and still have the warped view of a small boy bashing his head against a wall. Due to girls remaining undiagnosed, early interventions become unavailable to them, and supports for autistic people get less and less as they are older. So then I begin to think, what are the solutions? I'm aware that this self-study research is limited in many ways. One, by the lack of peer-reviewed literacy sources to draw upon. Two, by the scope and depth of this paper. And three, by my lack of practice in the psychological field. There is no hard and fast solution here. Until there is more funding and more research done into girls on the spectrum, and therefore more awareness systematically raised, girls will continue to get missed, and they will continue to be subjected to age-old autistic stereotypes. However, I do believe there are some things that can be put into practice for teachers to be able to recognise these girls, whether or not they are diagnosed, and provide some support to them. Although it will not be able to eliminate all the stresses of the autistic high school experience, it may be able to ease some and ultimately provide compassion and understanding when that hasn't always been available. When discussing autism, educators need to be learning about the differences between male and female presentation. It is evident from my time on placement that more professional development needs to be undertaken in all aspects of disability support, so that teachers have some tools, knowledge, and understanding in the classroom. As autistic students with lower support needs are commonly placed in mainstream schooling environments, and with more girls being diagnosed these days than when I was in school, Knowledge surrounding this is paramount. For teachers to be able to recognise even a few traits and act accordingly would provide these girls with the acknowledgement that their struggles are realised and heard. When teaching, aim to provide small, discrete alterations to learning to benefit the autistic girl. Literature supports that instead of asking for help when confused about instructions, girls on the spectrum are much more likely to hide their confusion and watch their peers for clarification, which they may not even find. This rings true to my schooling experience. I was terrified of authority figures, and I almost became mute around some adults well into my late teens. It is also common for autistic people to suffer from auditory processing issues, as well as sensory overload in the classroom environment, which can make it easy to miss crucial instructions. Simply providing handouts and writing on the board to clarify would have greatly assisted me. Autistic stimming is still something that is greatly stigmatised and misunderstood. Self-stimulatory behaviour is a way to deal with sensory overload. I've always been a scribbler. I still do it during university lectures. I now understand it helps me concentrate. When I'm not doing it, it's like I can't listen at all. Some autistic people may stim in a more obvious way, which should be accepted and acknowledged as a coping mechanism, especially in the classroom, which can be a very loud and overwhelming environment for lots of people on the spectrum. If teachers are aware of some of these traits, then they may be able to bring up concerns to other staff and even parents, depending on the situation, to help facilitate some sort of diagnosis in the future. The only feedback my parents received in my early schooling was my reluctance to work and contribute, and how I wasn't meeting my academic potential. In my senior school years, I became so perfectionistic. Intelligence became a part of my identity. I would break down in a fit if I even lost 1 mark on one of my assignments. But in my reports, this translated as diligence and academic prowess. All underlying concerns were either unnoticed or systematically ignored. I am still continuing to try and find sources that explore how autistic teachers survive in a full-time teaching position, especially as graduate teachers. I am currently unlucky in this search. There is research to support that people with autism are one of the most excluded groups from the workforce, with overt and covert measures used to discriminate. Conversations with both my peers and critical friends raise confusion over whether people should even disclose a disability or mental health disorder during the interview process. Should they disclose it after they have secured the job? Or is it better to never disclose at all? The major concern I have with not disclosing is early burnout from extensive masking, which is hiding obvious autistic traits to fit in, and ultimately hiding a massive part of who I am from my co-workers and my students. I am lucky in that with effort I can mask some of my autistic traits. I have a casual job at the moment, and I ended up telling my boss I was on the spectrum. She didn't vocalize it, but I could tell she was surprised. Many people on the spectrum are unable to mask as it consumes a massive amount of energy. Even at my casual job, I'm exhausted from masking, and at times have to call in sick as I am physically unable to get out of bed and function as a result. Herein lies the issue. In order to be competitive and secure a job, ultimately it is favourable to hide autistic traits. However, if I were to secure that job, I would be stuck in this vicious cycle of hiding who I am and eventually burning out and unable to continue. This is why more research is needed, exploring the experience of autistic teachers. There are more of us out there. I have even met several women on the spectrum during this degree. My diagnosing psychologist also told me many of her female patients choose teaching as a career path. I also wonder what the possibilities are of disclosing my autism to my future students. A part of me wants to be open and honest with them, and also to provide awareness of what autism can look like. During my last few years of secondary school, I had one teacher who showed a genuine interest in me and my learning. Looking back, I suspect she may have been on the spectrum, or at least had autistic traits. She was open with us that she had anxiety and struggled with her mental health, and was kind and compassionate about our own struggles. If I had a teacher who was open about her autism, it would have altered my view a lot earlier, and perhaps helped me in getting my own diagnosis down the track. But there is also this lingering worry about potential backlash from parents, from co-workers, and even perhaps from the students themselves. In conclusion, I still have some places to explore during this self-study, some thoughts to ruminate on and some rocks to overturn. The solutions I am looking into aren't clear-cut. However, what is obvious is the need for wider understanding and acceptance for girls on the spectrum and autistic people as a whole. Over the last year, I've struggled with my diagnosis. Emotions have ranged from angry to sad to strange peacefulness and understanding. I'm still on my own journey of understanding myself as an autistic woman. Every day I work towards self-acceptance and self-love. I know my experiences, my triumphs and my struggles have turned me into the person and the future educator I am today. But my ultimate goal is to provide young girls like me with the opportunity to start their journey a little bit earlier.